difference in the experiences between my two 14-year-old sons, Michael being a Black American and Jack being white, Caucasian. They have different challenges. My son Jack has an easier path. He just does. The interesting thing about both of these kids, Michael and Jack, is they're both handsome, articulate, really talented kids, gifted by God to do lots of things. But the reality is, and no one can tell me otherwise, my son Michael had a harder time than my son Jack is going to have simply because of the color of his skin. And that's a reality. It's an uncomfortable, painful one to acknowledge, but people have to recognize that's a fact.
Systemic racism exists in America. Yeah, you've tuned into the Biblical Conservative channel. I haven't changed. I'm still the same biblical conservative that you've tuned into, but I am now crystallizing what it is that I've been talking about for the past 2 some odd years. When I say that anti-Black racism exists, when I say that oppression exists, I speak on it from the standpoint that there have been institutions constructed by the Democratic Party to keep Black people in bondage, to keep Black people in a permanent serfdom position, starting with the New Deal, going through the Great Society, to affirmative action, to white and Black liberal elites joining together to accomplish the goal of keeping Black people in a constant position of fighting for quote unquote freedom, quote unquote your rights, because they have to continue to do that because it is in their interest. It is to their advantage to ensure that Black people remain in bondage. An interview with Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, resurfaced with Walter Isaacson. And this was after the George Floyd incident and the height of the BLM destruction that was taking place in society. And so in this interview, you'll hear that Mike Johnson talks about the realities of his adoptive Black son. And before I play this interview, I want to reiterate that when I say systemic racism exists, I say it exists not from America. I don't believe in the 1619 Project. I don't believe in critical race theory. All of those things are Marxist tools to be used to keep Black people separate from white people, to divide us based upon race. When I say that systemic racism, systemic anti-Black racism exists, it's because the Democratic Party has constructed this mindset in the Black community to keep Black people in bondage. That is where the systemic racism happens, because, and this is how you know it's real, is when people like myself speak out about it, we are called all kinds of names. We are castrated from people that look like us. The Black on Black vitriol is so heightened when you have a Black person just admit that we are not victims, we are empowered for greatness, that our rights come from God, not from government, that it's okay for us to think for ourselves. It's okay for us to vote based upon our biblical values. When a person like myself espouses those things, that's when you see this anti-Black racism go into effect. And Mike Johnson has personal experience with this.
Chris John and Congressman Mike Johnson, thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be with you. Thanks for having me.
What did you feel when you watched the video of George Floyd being killed?
I was outraged. I don't think anyone can view the video and objectively come to any other conclusion but that it was an act of murder. And I felt that initially, as everyone did. It's so disturbing. And, you know, the underlying issues beneath that are something that the country is now struggling with. And I think it's something we have to look at very soberly and with a lot of empathy. And I'm glad to see that's happening around the country.
You live up in Bossier City near Shreveport, and you and your wife, a long time ago, adopted a 14-year-old African-American young man and raised him along with your other children. Tell me about how that gave you some perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. We took Michael in almost 20 years ago. He was 14. I often, the easiest way to summarize our story is I ask friends, have you seen the movie The Blind Side? That was our story, except my Michael was not an NFL prospect. Similar story to that. And we took him in as our own. And Michael is now doing great. You know, this is 20 years later. He's in his mid 30s. He lives in California, 4 children of his own. He and Adonze have a great family life. And he says to people, he shares his testimony that were it not for our intervention in his life, that he would certainly have joined a gang, gotten on drugs, wound up in prison or dead on the street somewhere. And that's the harsh reality that we have here. You know, what it's taught me is we now have 4 other children of our own. And my oldest son, Jack, ironically, this year is 14. And I've thought often through all these ordeals over the last couple of weeks about the difference in the experiences between my two 14-year-old sons, Michael being a Black American and Jack being white, Caucasian. They have different challenges. My son Jack has an easier path. He just does. The interesting thing about both of these kids, Michael and Jack, is they're both handsome, articulate, really talented kids, gifted by God to do lots of things. But the reality is, and no one can tell me otherwise, my son Michael had a harder time than my son Jack is going to have simply because of the color of his skin. And that's a reality. It's an uncomfortable, painful one to acknowledge, but people have to recognize that's a fact.
Hey, I want to say, if you haven't done so already, please hit the like button and click subscribe so we can get this message out to as many people as we can to let them know that they're not victims, they are empowered for greatness. And that is a fact for a number of reasons. Because of the anti-Black racism that has been set up in this land, Mike Johnson's oldest son, the one he took in when he was 14, because of Mike Johnson's biblical values, he's a pastor, because he cares for children, he took his oldest son in. That oldest son, when people ask him about his family, where did he grow up, and if he's around a bunch of Black people that have this anti-Black racism, and he tells them that he grew up in a house that was white, with white parents, his adoptive white parents, those Black people will look down upon him and say that he's not Black. So immediately he has to deal with that harsh reality. And unfortunately, there's going to be some white people who will look down upon him as well. So that young man, unless he's strong in faith, strong in his spirit, will have to deal with the anti-Black racism that will come against him simply because he was brought up in a Caucasian home. Those are things that we have to face as a reality in this land. We have to face the reality that the systems that have been set up by Democrats, by liberals, by elites to destroy this land, those systems that have been set up by them to keep Black people in a permanent state of servanthood to the Democratic Party, those things are real and those things do exist. And so we need more people like Mike Johnson to pull people out of those systems, to show them a different way to live so they can live lives based upon what God has destined them to be, the destiny that God has for them, instead of living lives that this system, this anti-Black system, wants them to be. You have to understand something. As a Black man, this anti-Black system has a predisposed outcome for you. You are either going to be a drug dealer, you're either going to have multiple children by multiple women, you're going to go to jail, or you're going to be dead. And if you don't do those 4, you're either going to be a rapper, you're going to be an athlete, or you may end up being an actor. But either way, you are performing for this anti-Black system, this anti-Black racist system that the Democratic Party, the elites have constructed for Black people. It's like you're in a globe. People can shake up that snow globe and you see the people in there and you see the snow all around them. That's how Black people are in this anti-Black system. There's a cloud over them that they can't see out. They can't see anything except for what is in front of them. And unfortunately, too many Black people are so caught up in this because they use the media, they use entertainment, they use music like hip hop and those kind of things to reinforce, to constantly shake this globe in people's faces so they can't see straight. That's why we need the word of God to pierce through that murkiness, to pierce through that cloudiness to show us the light, to light the way. And it's so great that this man of God adopted that young man and placed him on a path for success. But that story is few and far in between, because this anti-black system, this racist system that this democratic establishment has set up, is bent on keeping black people in their place. And you know this system is starting to crumble a little bit, because now they want to replace black people with migrants from Venezuela.
What can we do about that?
I think that we really do need systematic change. I think we need transformative solutions. I think we're at a moment where we can begin to do more to form that more perfect union, as it says in the first line of the Constitution. You know, Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. King said the Declaration of Independence was a promissory note to future generations of Americans. We have not achieved yet what we can and should do, but I think this is a moment for us to do it. I think, and I hope that we can push the politics aside of it, all of the ulterior motives and agendas that so many organizations and groups have, and just look at this honestly. You know, if we could begin to see one another as our Creator sees us, you know, that's the central theme of America, is articulated, of course, in the second paragraph of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by God with their rights. God sees us equally. We're made in His image. As a Christian, I believe that. And if that's true, there are implications that come from that. As Americans, that being our foundational creed, we have to understand that every single person has inestimable dignity and value. And your value is not related in any way to the color of your skin, or what zip code you live in, or what you contribute to society. Your value is inherent because it's given to you by your Creator. That is the theme. That's the idea, the premise of America. And we have to live up to that.
And that is the truth. We have been created by God. We have inalienable rights given to us by our Creator, endowed upon us by our Creator. Our rights do not come from government. Our rights do not come from mankind. It comes from God. And when we recognize that, when we start to see each other the way God sees us, when we start to understand the human dignity, that you were made in the image of God, I was made in the image of God, then we can reconcile, we can relate to one another. And this anti-black system has been established to have black people see themselves as oppressed and see white people as oppressors, to have black people see themselves as less than and see white people as greater than, to have black people think about white supremacy all the time and black inferiority. Then what that does, it takes away the humanity. It takes away the dignity that God has placed inside of us, and it causes animosity and disdain for each other. We must fight back against that. We must understand it, and as conservatives, as a biblical conservative, we must recognize this reality. The first way to address this is to recognize the reality and talk through solutions. And the most important solution is to give people different outlooks on life, in particular in the black community, is to go into these communities and speak life to these communities, to break up that fallow ground, to break up that hard ground that this anti-black racism has created. And it can be done.